And the topic of the day, let's just get to it. The long, winding road at Auburn in their football coaching search is over. Really, honestly, by Auburn standards, really not quite as crazy as I was anticipating. Brian Harsin gets fired about a month ago. From there, they get hot and heavy with Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin uses them to get more at Ole Miss, like I told you he was going to. Then they pursue Hugh Freeze. Then there's like a little 1 day, 36-hour window where the fan base revolts. The fan base gets mad. I don't know what percentage of the fan base it was, but they were very vocal on social media. You think maybe Auburn is going to move off of Hugh Freeze? No, 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 no. As of about Monday, 3 o'clock Eastern or so, Hugh Freeze is officially your Auburn head football coach. And so let's break it down. Let's talk about him, his past, the present, the future, because I'll tell you, there are a lot of layers to this hire, but ultimately I do believe this was the right hire for Auburn. And let's get right to that right there. I believe this was the guy for Auburn. I have always believed this was the guy for Auburn. Listen, ultimately at the end of the day, you can kick the tires on Lane Kiffin. I never thought, as I just said a minute ago, that Lane Kiffin was ever a serious candidate at Auburn. That's no knock on Auburn. That's just the reality of the situation. Ole Miss wasn't going to get outbid. Ole Miss, he's kind of settled there. He's got things going. He doesn't seem like at this point in his career he wants to jump around jobs. He did that with Tennessee and USC a decade ago. He said how happy he is at Ole Miss. And so to me, I never really believed that he was going to end up at Auburn. And so right behind him all along was Hugh Freeze. And why I believe Hugh Freeze was the best candidate for this job is pretty straightforward. Once Lane Kiffin says no, there's only one guy that has proven the ability to win at a very high level in the SEC, and more specifically when you're Auburn, to beat Nick Saban, right? So in terms of winning at the highest level, I think people don't really realize just how good Hugh Freeze actually was at Ole Miss. I mean, I know how it ended and it was bad and it was this and it was that. Here's the bottom line with Hugh Freeze, though. Gets there, takes over a 2-10 program in the pre-transfer portal era. In year one, Ole Miss goes 7-6 and goes to a bowl game. Okay, so a 5-win improvement in year one. By year two, they are playing at a really high level. By year three, they are going to a New Year's Six Bowl. And by year four, they have 10 wins, okay? And so you talk about an incremental rise, right? From 7 wins, bowl game, New Year's Six in year three to a Sugar Bowl win and 10-win season in year four. At Ole Miss in the modern era, that's about as good as it gets. I know Lane Kiffin made a Sugar Bowl last year. I get that. This is no disrespect to what Lane Kiffin did, but that 4-year stretch was really, really, really special. Oh, by the way, during that 4-year stretch, you know what it included? 2 wins over Nick Saban. And so you can poo-poo it and you could say it was 7 or 8 years ago and he hadn't done this and the program hadn't changed that. The bottom line is, and I've thrown this stat around, as best as I know, and I could be wrong on this, but I don't think I am, there are only 3 guys in major college football that have multiple head-to-head coaching wins against Nick Saban. One, Dabo Swinney. He's been pretty good the last decade. Now, what Dabo does going forward, I don't know, but he's been pretty good. The other is Gus Malzahn. And of course, the other is Hugh Freeze. And so when you look at the current situation, if you're Auburn and the end game is to, 1, compete at the highest level, but 2, compete with that other guy across the state who has given you fits for 15 years, there's only one guy that has gone head-to-head and is absolutely fearless that you can realistically get. There's only one guy that's actually crazy enough to take the Auburn job given the circumstances. That's Hugh Freeze, and you went and got him. Here's the thing, though, about Hugh Freeze that I don't think enough people really talk about when it comes to him. We talk about the 2 great seasons at Ole Miss. We talk about the 2 great wins against Alabama. What I think goes understated, though, is the fact that this guy has basically won everywhere he has gone all throughout his career, okay? Here is his resume before and after Ole Miss for people who have forgotten. He won at the high school level. We've all seen the blind side. We've all seen Michael Orr. Before Michael Orr, after Michael Orr, during Michael Orr, won a lot of football games. Goes to an NAIA school called Lambeth. Year 1, 8 wins. Year 2, 12-1. I'd say that's pretty good. Goes to Arkansas State from there in 1 season. Wins 10 games. Goes to Ole Miss. And then I think this is the important part, okay? This is the part that I think is important. Gets fired from Ole Miss, and we know what happened. We're going to talk about it in a minute. But then after a few years out of football, gets back in at Liberty, it immediately wins right away. 8 wins in year 1, 10 wins in year 2, 8 wins in each of the last 2 seasons. And remember, this was a program that was transitioning to the FBS level. This was a program that was not competing at the same level as everybody else in terms of scholarships and in terms of all the other things that come with being a full-fledged FBS member. Guy won 8 games across the board, was 8-1 this year before they struggled down the stretch. Now, some of it maybe, at least on Saturday, was because of the rumors about Auburn, but never forget, he went into an SEC stadium and got a win. What? Same number of SEC wins this year as Brian Harsin, 1 win each. So this guy can coach, and I think that last part is the important part. It'd be one thing if he coached in the SEC a million years ago and hadn't had success since, or he left and he went somewhere else and now he's trying to come back. I talked about it with Matt Rule on Monday's show. You just never know when you get a guy for a second, third go-around. Hugh Freeze, though, I do think is a little bit different, right? He's been in the footprint, and he is coaching now and still winning at a high level. Be one thing if he went and was an assistant coach for a few years, or one thing and he went to the NFL and disappeared, whatever. This guy was winning in college this year and last year and the 2020 COVID season. And so to me, he has had success. He has turned programs around quickly. And he's talked about it on this podcast. What goes into winning? What goes into success at a high level? I give him credit, man. Everywhere he's gone, not only has he won, he's won right away. Now, of course, whenever you say nice things about Hugh Freeze, everybody gives the same answer. Well, did you see how he left Ole Miss? I'm not going to sit here. I'm not going to pretend like it was hunky-dory, and I'm going to ignore it. I'm not going to pretend. But a couple thoughts kind of come to mind here. One, the guy made a very public mistake. It was embarrassing. It was really bad, and he had to answer for that mistake. He had to answer with his wife. He had to answer with his kids. But as I've said many times, if his wife has forgiven him and his kids have forgiven him, who am I to sit here and judge somebody, their character, they're off the field, they're this, they're that. And by the way, it's not only because he's come on this podcast, because I asked him those tough questions, and I thought he gave very good answers about forgiveness, about this, about that. And it was interesting. I didn't put it out on social media because I didn't want to argue with idiots. But at the same time, how long, what's the term, the period where like how long does this guy have to keep saying I'm sorry before we all move on, right? Like I say this all the time. I've used the analogy a million times. I argue with my mom all the time about Michael Vick, right? She's an animal advocate. Like she thinks Michael Vick should never be allowed to leave the house again. And I say, Mom, like he paid his penance to society. He went to jail. He did this. He did that. Now I'm not comparing what Michael Vick did to what Hugh Freeze did, whatever. But at a certain point, you make a mistake, you got to be allowed to pick yourself up. You have to be allowed to pick yourself up off the ground and be forgiven, right? Like that's part of society, right? We all make mistakes. I'm not saying that I'm perfect. I'm not saying that I condone the behavior of Hugh Freeze at Ole Miss, but at the same time, I'm just saying if his wife forgives him, if his kids forgive him, that's that. And how long do we, what is the period where we have to keep pretending like we're outraged about it? Because I don't really know that many people that are that outraged about it. Made a mistake, forgiven, got back into coaching. Now he's in the SEC. By the way, I said it on Monday's show. For the people that are like, well, what about, there's stuff that you don't know about. I mean, yeah, maybe, but that's why you hire a search firm. Like that's why you pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to a search firm to make sure there's nothing else. And so if the search firm came back with nothing, then yes, I think it's okay to hire him. I think it's okay to let him lead a football program. And if you don't want it for your school, or if your school wouldn't have hired him, that's fine. Auburn wants to win. Auburn wants to beat Alabama. And that is what they are going to do. So I'm very curious to see how this plays out. By the way, credit to the AD, John Cohen. I thought it took some stones from John Cohen, right? Because we hear about Auburn all the time. We talked about it on Monday's show. JABA, just Auburn being Auburn. They can't get out of their own way on a lot of this stuff. And so I give John Cohen credit for staring his fan base in the face and saying, you know what? We're here to win football games. This guy made a mistake. We forgive him. By the way, if there was anybody that wasn't going to forgive him, it should be John Cohen. John Cohen was at Mississippi State when he was at Ole Miss. So credit to the AD for saying, look, we're here to win football games. And when we win a bunch, guess what? None of you are going to care about this stuff. And I truly believe that's going to be the case. Everybody moves on. We moved on from all sorts of people and all sorts of things and all sorts of indiscretion. So I don't really care. And I think the last thing I want to talk about is how quickly can Hugh Freeze flip this? Because I'm just going to tell you, I will say this. I think it's going to happen fast. I think it's going to be shocking how good they are. And I think Auburn fans are going to have a lot to be excited about in the coming years. First off, like I said, Hugh Freeze wins everywhere he goes. First head coaching job at the college level, 12 wins in year 2 at Lambeth, 8 wins in year 1. Ole Miss, 2-10 to 7-6 in year 1 with the same roster in the pre-transfer portal era. Liberty, 10 wins by year 2 as they're transitioning from the FCS to the FBS. This guy wins everywhere he goes. And here's the crazy part. He has never taken over a program in the transfer portal era. And so when I look at Auburn, you know who my blueprint is for how quickly Auburn can flip things? How about those LSU Tigers? Went from 6-6 last year to 9-3 this past season, and they're the SEC West champs. Now, am I saying Auburn is going to win the SEC West next year? No, I don't think so. There's too many good coaches in that division. But in the transfer portal era, can you flip a roster really quick? Heck yeah, you can. Remember, LSU, their best offensive player, or their most important one, Jaden Daniels, was not on the roster at this time last year. And their best defensive player, Harold Perkins, wasn't on the roster last year. So that can happen really fast. Harold Perkins is a recruit. He was a 5-star. He wasn't a transfer guy. But if LSU can flip it that fast, why can't Auburn? Also, USC, 4-8 last year. They're playing to go to the college football playoff this weekend. You can go to the lowest levels of college football. UConn football, I've shared the stat many times. 4 wins from 2018 to 2021. My guy Jim Mora comes in. They're 6-6 this year, and they're playing to go to a bowl. They are in a bowl. It's just a matter of where. So I think this can happen quick. I think NIL in this case is certainly going to help. We've talked quite a bit about Auburn's NIL setup. What is it? $13 million they have raised in funds. Again, maybe you like NIL, maybe you don't like NIL. This is the world that we live in. LSU's doing it. Alabama's doing it. USC's doing it. Ole Miss is doing it. Texas A&M. I'm not here to criticize anybody for doing it. This is the new world, and Auburn is in pretty good shape. And so you add all of that in, and oh, by the way, here's a fun fact. I looked at Auburn's schedule last year. So keep in mind, Auburn goes 5-7 this year, in a year where they're abjectly terrible and they fired their head coach. Okay, they go 5-7 this year. I looked at their schedule for a year from now. They still play in the SEC West. You can't get rid of that. Georgia is still their permanent crossover game. Here is the rest of their schedule. They're out of conference games. UMass, that's probably a win, I would guess. Samford, not Stanford, Samford, like the guy with the sun. At Cal's terrible. Long flight, but they're terrible. Whole crowd will probably be Auburn fans, but they're terrible. I think Justin Wilcox is a good coach. I just think Cal's a really hard place to win. And then on top of that, your final game is against New Mexico State before you play Alabama. So those feel like 4 wins right there. Again, Samford, UMass, New Mexico State, at Cal feels like 4 wins. And you also get Vanderbilt in your cross-division game. So I think Hugh Freeze, you're going to be starting with a baseline of 5 wins. And this is after a season where you just went 5-7. And you're going to get bowl eligible. And you're going to get to 6, 7, maybe 8 wins next season, depending on how things break. Now, Alabama's still going to be Alabama. LSU is going to be year 2 under Brian Kelly. We'll see what happens at Ole Miss. A&M, if they don't get creamed by the portal, should be pretty good. But I just bring this up to say, I think Hugh Freeze is going to win. He's going to win big. He's going to win quick. And everybody is going to completely forget about all the complaints they had today.